From We Are Spectacular, this is the Spectacular Marketing Podcast. A podcast about everything brand, marketing, digital and social for the food and drink industry and beyond. So today I'm working from Platform 9, which is an amazing co-working space down in Brighton. And as I look around, I see lots of people filming meetings and brainstorms and basically documenting what they're doing. It really made me think about content and the worry and the anxiety of creating something Oscar-winning and iconic. Today's episode, we actually talked to an expert in this area called Ashley Pollak. And Ashley is the creative director of an agency called Etio. Ashley really gives us some great insight on how to best get started when you're making content, and also some tips and tricks about what you should do for each channel when you're really trying to target the audience with the right message. We kick off talking about a Deliveroo delivery, which hasn't turned up, but then after that, we get straight into talking about what makes great content and also how great your brand's content might be. Enjoy. Gives me great pleasure today to have the enigmatic Ashley Pollak in the podcast studio to talk about all things content and storytelling. Hi, Ashley.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. It's all right. Well, it's been a bit of a weird meeting because you turned up and I was raging at a phone because Deliveroo didn't turn up for my little snack in between takes. So, I'm slightly disappointed with their customer service at the moment.
That's right. I had my Ryvita with, that's a new thing, cheddar cheese melted on Ryvita with some tuna.
That's inventive.
Good little inventive snack to run out the door.
Nice. Good stuff. So you came all the way down or up or around from Tooting?
Not too far. So up on the Northern Line, so Tooting Beck, very, very glamorous, but actually it's pretty convenient for getting into town.
Yeah.
So,
it's pretty shishy now, isn't it, these days?
Well, it's 4 minutes from my house as well. So the joy of having your own company is you can choose your surroundings.
Well, I've not learnt that lesson because, I live in Brighton and, we've got the office in Oxford Street. So, I need to take a leaf out your book. So we've been chatting for a little bit. You've been super helpful and super observant on the podcast and giving me tips and things, which have been invaluable. So I need to, you need to send me an invoice or something for that.
Well, I think it's good. I think you made a really great start. I got a bit obsessed with podcasts. There was an intern who worked for me and he had a really long commute. And I said, such a waste of time. He said, no, podcasts. You have to get into podcasts.
Yeah.
And
I think it's having a little bit of a renaissance, because I think for a while, it was done. To be honest, I was thinking it was really outdated, and then I just got back into it, and I think it has been a lot of travelling, being away from home, these types of things, and more comedy podcasts than anything. But really kind of getting into that, and then I think we just found there wasn't too many marketing ones, certainly not for food and drink. So we thought, might as well give it a go. So
that's what I noticed. So good to be here.
Nice. So in terms of us, we sort of met over LinkedIn, first of all, I think.
Yeah, LinkedIn. I saw some. Interestingly, when you talk about content, your tone of voice came across on LinkedIn on a few posts.
Scottish.
I got
What is that guy saying?
Yeah, just got a sense of. I mean, that's maybe actually a good starting point. If you're telling a good story, it's about personality and character. And there's a lot of people on LinkedIn who are just putting up the same content as everyone else. So actually having a sort of unique voice. There we go.
I've got to ramble somewhere. I've got to ramble somewhere. So in terms of you've got a really I was going to say checkered background. I don't think that's right, but you've got a real interesting story in terms of how you've became this, storyteller. So we should say as well. So you're the creative director at Etio, which is a fun name, and as a brand guy at heart, I'm always curious about where it came from. Yeah, I think you sort of alluded to it.
That's actually a link between us because Scotland's somewhere I still long to be. I studied at film school up in Edinburgh, And
That's the wrong side of Scotland, but never mind.
well, I used to go to Glasgow. Mountain biking, I used to go all over. But Etio was actually, I needed something to put on my films. Documentary was my passion at film school. And I probably read something at the time, all the best brands, not many letters, try and do as few letters as possible. And I was just searching for a thesaurus, came across this word etiology. The American spelling, I think in English it starts with an A. And it's a medical term on the causality, studying the causality of diseases, but actually it is used more broadly than medical terms. Anyway, chopped off theology, thought Etio, that's a good that's a good 4 letters. Bought the .co.uk address because it was a £5, I think. The .com address was a tenner. Didn't buy it, and then 10 years later someone offered to sell it to me for 30 grand. And away we go. It was just a thing I kind of kept in my back pocket. And after finishing film school, working as I was a graduate account exec on washing powder and alcohol at Grey London, and then I worked briefly for a direct marketing company for Samsung, and did some films there, actually, Microsoft. And then I left and sort of wanted to reconnect with my filmic roots. So I worked as a camera trainee with a BBC News cameraman, and that sort of led to me doing some of that work myself. But I was kind of missing this sort of craving this strategic side of my brain to be activated. And I ended up doing some consultancy or sort of contract work at Marks and Spencer on new business areas. It was a bit of I don't know how I got the job. Met my wife there as well, so that was rather lovely.
2 for 1.
2 for 1. And so I was doing research and helping to put together presentations to the board on white goods and wedding lists and home standalone stores. And one of the areas was corporate responsibility. And I got this annual report, opened it, and there were sort of 40 different stories that they were involved in. They'd moved production from one country to another, not because it was cheaper, but because it was an ethically or morally right decision to make. They had removed glass out the bottom of glass bottles to save glass, which they hadn't even told anyone about, but that had saved hundreds of thousands of tons of glass. And I said, these stories are amazing, you should be telling people about them. And I took the initiative, resurrected Etio as a little thing, said, I've got this entity, created a team with a friend who worked at the BBC and pitched this idea that M&S, as one of the most trusted brands in the country, should be leading the way on corporate responsibility. And that was kind of the start of Etio. It took me another 3 years before anyone would listen to me again in terms of that kind of joined up storytelling video campaign type approach. But that's where it started.
I think it's brilliant, and I think what's so exciting, and for anyone starting out in their career, looking at that is that absolute holy trinity of always saying yes and being positive. Any opportunity. One of my old bosses years ago was fantastic, and he said, if there's a vacuum, fill it. So if there's an opportunity, just put your hand up and get it done. And I've always been of the same mind, but also joining together your history, your storytelling and the video side of things and all that, smashed with what your business brain's doing. So it's just
well, you've also got to
happens,
slightly morph and adapt, because the guy who hired me, I was terrible at the job they hired me to do. And instead of firing me, he was like, actually, what is Ash good at? And then I sort of moulded myself into that space. I mean, I definitely wasn't a corporate creature. I'd never have thrived in that kind of environment. And, it's a risk setting up. I mean, hopefully people listening to this podcast, whether they've got a restaurant or whatever brand they've got, it's a risk setting up your own thing. But from my perspective, I've thought it was more risky waiting for someone to call me. I'd wanted to kind of grab it by the reins and run with it. And that did mean the first year I set up, nearly a year of pitching and talking and no one buying into what, and, really struggling, but having a core kind of belief in the principles of what I was trying to create. And eventually Millies Cookies was the thing that sort of the next client who actually listened to this big idea of not just doing reactive filmmaking. I mean,
so what happened with Millies then? So We've done a bit of work on Millies over the years as well. So
okay,
what happened?
So Millies was a bit of a challenge because the fact is, at Etio, I think there are a few values that are the core of what we do. It's written on our wall: passion, purpose, curiosity. The fact is, with Millies, there is no Aunt Millie. There is no sort of kitchen in a cottage in the Cotswolds where there isn't really a story. Actually, it's something that is stamped on a product that's produced in a factory. It's quite tasty. But essentially, there's not a story. So what I found quite hard there is with food, the natural place you want to go, or food or craft, is to look at the story of how something's created, like recipes. That's why when BBC Two first started, it was cooking shows, home DIY shows, and art. And there wasn't really that there for Millie. So for that, it was really interrogating, okay, who are the customers? Who are the customers in terms of social media? They had screens in some of their stores, so we knew we'd be able to play this content in the stores themselves. So it was primarily, 16 to 20-year-old girls and also mums. So we kind of thought, well, how can we give the sort of tone of the brand, how can we put the tone of the brand across? Because this isn't about how this stuff is produced, it's about more of an attitudinal thing.
And what would you say the tone was?
So,
how did you find it?
Well, here's another little question in there, or a little point in there is, don't be afraid of copying something if you see that it works. And I'd say actually there's quite a lot of things we've done where I've gone, do you know what, when we did lastminute.com, that travel brand did something interesting. What if we did that and tweaked it slightly? I think Richard Branson says that at Virgin, doesn't it? Just do it, do it better. So
Steal with Pride, I think.
Steal with Pride, yeah. So T4 on Channel 4 was what we ripped off. We thought, well, that's the type of show they're watching on TV. How could Millies bring them that kind of content? So we created this online TV show. We were very lucky at the time. We were part of a startup incubator that had a TV studio in it. So that enabled us to have a sort of 3-camera studio set up, Ravensbourne College. And we had led by presenters, and we did film reviews, and we linked up with bands who'd play on the show, and then they'd have an icing competition, and there was a news segment that was called the Cookie Flash, and so it was great actually, and it produced a lot of content. In the end, we're not a social agency. I've learned to focus on video, but we ended up sort of running their Facebook page because we had all this content we were producing, behind the scenes stuff, competitions, and I mean this was a sort of time in Facebook that somewhat disappeared. It was easier to kind of build an audience then, I think, because this was...
What sort of date was this, do you reckon?
About 8 years ago. 9 years ago.
2009, something like that.
Oh God, I'm rubbish at years. But essentially...
You're wearing it well. Yeah.
Essentially, we got, I think the audience was 8,000 and we got it up to 40,000 within sort of 3 months or something. I don't think that would be possible now.
Yeah.
But at the time, we were sort of piggybacking bands and different sort of leveraging other audiences, I suppose, which... that rule still applies.
And where did it get posted in? Facebook? Where else?
Facebook, Twitter. There was a section of the Millies site that was for the Cookie Club that you joined.
Oh, I remember.
So then there was an email element, and then on that site there was exclusive content, and that's where the competitions were. Didn't quite all gel together because the site was a bit clunky, and then in the stores, and then... the content would be on these bands' websites or the different people that we linked up with. That was the first time I kind of did something that really hung together and kind of built. And also, it was iterative. I think that's another key thing with video and digital now is you've got to be careful that the data and insight you get doesn't take over, but... you can put something out and you can really analyse, well, what were people interested in? Where did they switch off? And if you have that longer standing relationship with a client, which is what we hope, or I guess if you're a brand yourself, you can go, well, we tried that. Let's tweak that. Let's try slightly differently. Let's try something shorter. Let's try something longer. Let's try. Yeah. And
I think the mistake that so many brands make, and it's happened to me when I've been on the inside, and then it's just shut down. And if something didn't work, they don't actually go in and pick it apart and say, well, what bit? So I think that's really positive. You saying overall it might be like it was okay, but maybe there was just that segment that really worked, or maybe it was all about bands, and then music becomes a platform for them.
Yeah.
Maybe the icing competition like Saturday Kitchen, where they make that 30-second 3-egg omelette or whatever it is, which looks inedible most of the time. But, then maybe that's the hook, And I think a lot of people, a lot of clients we see, it's like, we've done digital, we've done Facebook, and it's like, it's not like you can complete it or you can then put it aside. You just need to attack it from a different angle because it's working for millions of other people. So why wouldn't it work for you?
Yeah, and I think there's also that social media is a funny beast. I use social media, but it's definitely a sort of love-hate relationship sometimes. But we do some work with Treatwell, and that work is primarily social.
Yes. So Treatwell, just for people who don't know,
is health and beauty. It was the lastminute.com of health and beauty, although I'm not sure the...
Yeah, it was actually Lopo, who was my director, went over and started that. So
great.
They've been great success.
Great business, and a very social business, so it's entirely logical that the content is social, but it lives and dies so quickly. And when you look at a business like Wyevale Garden Centres, who we work with, whose customer is, like my mum, sort of late 60s or whatever, that content that you produce can still be relevant, in a year's time when they're planting their gardens. So there is also this distinction between short tail and long tail content. Like, how do you produce something for social that's going to capture the imagination, be shareable, be funny, whatever it is.
But is economical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you put your money into like the evergreen, to use the Wyevale analogy. But
the balance between those. There's again, as you say, there's not one solution, but I definitely think social. I put a post on LinkedIn. I think it was the one that got me the most comments and stuff. I called it. It was based on something I read. I said, "Is it time to dump your Facebook page?" And I'd read this article where a company had just decided, actually, we're just going to forget about social. We're going to concentrate on our email, our website, the things we own. And they'd seen that had been very, very successful. So I think social can really, especially as a smaller brand, be overwhelming because you're like, well, how am I, you don't want to have the same content on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and everywhere. You need it to be, but how much do you actually invest in that versus the return you get? Yeah. So if you're a small brand, I mean, we talked about this in terms of just before this about the stages of video. It's all about the brief. Like, who are you talking to? What do they think? What do you want them to think? What do you want them to do? And it's really helpful as well. I've got some wonderful guidance when I worked in direct marketing for Steve Harrison. It's his brief that I've ripped off. Yeah. But he always said, you sort of write it in the first person. So who's your audience? What do they think? So say what you think, like say it in their voice. And so you try and identify with them instead of sort of saying it's, Joe 43 and this, like, be that person and write down what they think and just think how video or design or social or advertising, how that is going to solve something for you and let that lead it. And that could be something very practical. People are coming to the website and you want to build trust with them. So I was talking to my hairdresser recently and I said...
They're doing a good job? They're doing a good job. It looks good.
Thank you very much. Oh, not that hairdresser. No, I don't go back to that one. But I said to him, maybe you have a video on your site just with you talking, because actually if I'm looking at your site and there's a load of other hairdressers and this one site has Bob and I'm like, oh, Bob, he's a cool guy. Like, suddenly you've built trust and a connection. You don't need to do that video in a complicated way. If you get the right bits to plug into your iPhone, I can see you've got a mic plugged into yours. Make sure it's well lit, make sure you can hear the sound. You do that on a phone. Yeah. You don't need a Ponzi company.
Like us.
But that's trying to think strategically, and that's where an agency hopefully is of benefit, that we can come along, you guys can come along, and we're sort of unrestricted by what you currently think. Yeah. We did a film for the London Centre for Nanotechnology, and I love that job because I got a book, Nanotechnology for Dummies. I knew nothing about it, and I could be in an interview and like hold my hand up and go, I have no idea what you just said. Like, can you break that down for me? Because,
well, I was going to ask for a friend what that meant. Asking for
it's the coming together of, I mean, it's an amazing institute. It brings together UCL and different King's College, and it's all these different people working from different disciplines on basically amazing stuff you can't see effectively. Right. But having that distance is helpful. So I think that's one of the things. If you're doing your own marketing, if you're producing your own videos, ask your friends, ask your mum, put a post up on Facebook asking people what they think. Try and get some distance so you can come sort of back at that brief. Mm-hmm. There's a classic thing with car companies that, I don't know, the story I heard, Volkswagen or something in the 60s, where the people who make the cars think the factory's interesting, but the people who buy the cars, they're the ones, they're going on road trips. They want to know what that product is how that's going to affect their lifestyle, what that's going to enable.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge if you're doing your own content.
Well, I think, and we've touched on it in a couple of podcasts now, and it'll probably be a recurring theme, which is so many, of the marketers or the creatives or whatever, they're very personal about it. And actually, I think the trick of making yourself a great content person, storyteller, brand marketer, digital, whatever it is just always living in the customer's shoes, just being obsessed about what's their life really like. Are they a bit hard up for money? Do they just listen to radio all the time? And I think it's really about looking at the data, and saying what are they doing, what are they visiting, what are their likes. And like the Facebook stuff, I mean, obviously they know an awful lot about us and it's much in the news at the moment. But, if you actually look through what people are liking, drawing synergies, if you like coffee, you'll probably like cycling, and you might be into tech, which means you might be into music and good films. And, and all of a sudden, that's a much richer place to be, rather than saying we're trying to push our coffee. And I think if you can just be lateral sometimes, and I think in your job, it's probably about being lateral most of the time rather than literal, because otherwise it'll just look like an infomercial, and that would be rubbish.
It's also you can overcomplicate things. So that's the slightly frightening thing with this whole Cambridge Analytica thing, is if it's to be believed, data has been used in a highly targeted way to influence the stories that are told to very relevant people. That's I shouldn't say it, but I mean, that's quite an exciting concept if it had been done ethically. Yeah. But it's also quite scary. But I think, everyone talks about big data, but you don't need a lot of data or insight. I was listening to, I think, a podcast or news the other day where they were saying if you just know what paper someone reads or just very little information, that can tell you a lot. So that reminds me of, I went to a talk by the guy who did set up Goo puddings, and hear these sort of entrepreneur stories where they stood in the supermarket with fake products on the shelves and watched what people did. And social media and conversations, is a conversation that happens to be within a form of social media. You should be able to have that same conversation in the pub over a drink with someone, or in a supermarket queue or whatever. So also don't try and be too clever, simplifying. And that's the point with that nanotechnology thing. Like, it's fully justified for me to turn around and say, let's pare this back. Yeah. Actually, it's about what you don't say rather than what you do say.
And I think, what's so interesting about, video is that you're in a great sweet spot right now, in terms of everyone is either thinking about, already wanting, or will want shed loads of content. And everyone will be trying to figure out, certainly in food and drink, how they can do this economically. What's the process? Should they have internal videographers, external, all this stuff. So thinking about that, I mean, what's your advice? You said start at the brief, start at what you're wanting to achieve. I mean, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, if I was back at Yo Sushi and I was in there as the marketing manager or whatever, and I was thinking about content, but I don't have a lot of budget, which is the case mainly with food and drink, then what would you say to them? How would you approach it?
Okay, two ways round of looking at it. Mm-hmm. If you came to me as an agency and said that, I think that's different from if you're the restaurant owner in Manchester, wherever it is. Yeah. There's a slightly different approach. From my perspective, one of the things I've learned is to come up with the right solution to the budget. So one of my mistakes has been, I always want to do the best job, and I'll throw as much into something that doesn't have a budget and that is not a good way to build a business, to be frank.
Well,
so
you'll keep customers.
as long as you don't get bankrupt, anyway, thankfully not in that position now. But what I mean by that, for example, Wyevale didn't have much money to do a Christmas ad. I mean, really didn't have any money compared to Sainsbury's or whatever. But they had something quite ownable. I mean, most of the time the client I talk to comes up with the idea. They just don't realise they did. So we're in a meeting and they said, the moment that Wyevale owns is that moment, that joyful moment of bringing the tree home and dressing the tree. That's our moment. I was just stuck that in my memory bank. Didn't have much money, but they were doing a photo shoot. So I said, just keep in touch. Let me know what you're doing with the photo shoot. Let us know some parameters, and we'll try and come up with an idea within those. So they did this product shoot, and whatever date. I said, well, can you just get an extra date in the location? That's not going to cost you double. It'd probably be 30% more than one day. Yeah. And all we did was we went in one of the styled tree section. You can put a link to it on the podcast.
No, we will.
We took one of the beautifully styled Christmas tree next to a fireplace shots, and we got an actress, and we basically did stop motion backwards. So what happens in the video is she walks into the room, looks at the corner of the room, it's this dusty, unloved corner of the room, and then magically the Wyevale bag empties all these decorations out and it fills up the tree. Wow. And that was, I think we charged $3,500. Should have charged more because the idea, I think, is pretty good. But practically, it was a 3-person crew, a lot of bloody time moving decorations on a tree. My dog, who was at the shoot, who had a starring role. And that was a really successful piece of content. And so actually, creatively, any decent creative, if you say a restriction, as long as the restriction is not ridiculous, I've got a brief at the moment and the budget for that, it just isn't doable. And I think it's actually just as important for me to turn around and potentially lose the work to say that's just not realistic.
Yeah.
But having a restricted budget as an agency, as long as you come up with the right solution for the budget, is fine. I think if you're the one that's making the content, you've only got to look at, I'm just old enough to be able to say this, but the YouTube kids, that the fact is that there's a lot of YouTubers who are young guys and gals who are in their parents' bedroom, weren't paying rent, bought the kit, simple ring for their camera, learned how to make it, that it sounds good, etc. And then they're producing content every day. A lot of brands can't. In fact, most brands I work with can't keep up with that approach. Yeah. But the best ones of those, the best podcasts, are where there is a great story and the person that is talking or in front of camera is engaging. It isn't necessarily always a case of saving money if you're like, well, I can rope in a friend to do that. Yeah. Wyevale, we work with a wonderful up-and-coming, established author, actually, Dawn Isaacs. It was an amazing presenter. It meant we filmed a day, we got our money's worth because every take she got it. Yeah. So don't try and cut corners in the wrong places. If someone is not good in front of camera, it doesn't matter how great the kit is. Yeah. You might need to hire a presenter. But there's a lot of great film students. Yeah.
Well, I think there's going to be a trend on that, and it's something I've got a kind of speech I suppose I've been sort of dining out on for a while, probably in a new one soon. But part of that was saying there's going to be so much more faces of brands because they're going to need a presenter. And, as you're saying, your exec chef or your managing director or, whoever it is, just might be crap in front. It just might not be their game. Their game is something else. And that's okay because I think there's, opportunity to then, it's going to go almost back to the Wayne's World sort of endorsement, with the Pizza Hut and the Pepsi sort of scene when he's smiling at the camera and stuff. And I think that's an older reference for a lot of people. But I think from that perspective, I think that'll be quite interesting. But there's the flip side, which is, like what we're doing right now. It's democratized doing this, so does it really matter if it's a bit echoey? Does it really? I think the most important thing is just try stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and just get it out there. And, you know, I think you can sit and try and be perfect. But when I was at lastminute.com, you know, back in the day with, you know, Brent Hoberman, who's, you know, one of the forefathers of web in the UK, certainly. And he just always said, look, don't wait. You know, just get it up there and you'll fix it as it goes. You know, you just don't wait till it's
learn
perfect.
and iterate. And,
or it just won't happen because you'll lose.
Yep.
So, you know, that's always kind of stuck with me, you know. So in terms of that, so basically...
There's one thing you said there that just little thing that hung in my head. One thing is, if you're a smaller brand and you happen to be the type of person who is brilliant in front of camera, try and leverage every other place, every other audience that you can jump on to share your story. So we did some content for training chefs. Mm-hmm. And could have all been classroom stuff, but we pitched in, right, we're going to go to Bricks and Fish Market to do the you know, different types of fish and how to fillet a fish, and we're going to go to the Huntsman Farm, the farm that supplies, I think it was Heston, or we'll go to these locations, that'd be great. And we needed a chef to present it, and great friend now, Jovi, who runs a restaurant in Croydon called Albert's Table, was great on camera and became the front for that. And then off the back of that, used some of that content for his, you know, if other people are looking for someone to go and talk, there's no, you know, if you look at chefs, Jamie Oliver, etc., there's obviously a benefit to being on other things. So seek those out, seek out any avenue where you can tell your story.
I think it's about, you know, trying to unlock the talent of your team. And God, it's so interesting. Years ago, I was on a round table for music, and it was with Steve Mack and a few other people, and it came up about being a band these days, and this was, you know, 2003 or whatever it was. And, you know, one of the things that was said there was, you don't just need to be good at guitar, you need a marketing degree as well. Like, you know, it was all part of it, how you dressed and what you did, and you know, and I think it's becoming the same with any brand now. And everyone's got to be acting like they're a celebrity. You know, it's almost mandatory now, like it or not, as you're, you know, something to turn your attention to is being good in front of like almost the old-fashioned being media trained. You know, and one of the best things I definitely recommend this to anyone. Not that it was about comedy, but I went on a comedy stand-up course. You know. And what that taught you was, A, to just be brave because it was terrifying. But also it taught you just to build a story. And also things like callback to maybe a joke that was referenced in the first 20 seconds as opposed to minute 2. And, you know, these types of things. And I think there's so many tricks that people could pull. And now, you know, a lot of discussions we're having with parents and stuff. I mean, our little one's 5.5 and she's got a YouTube channel. Right, so we've locked it all down.
He hasn't quite got it.
So I mean, we've locked it all down and stuff. But you know, actually caught her hanging out the window with my phone, and I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, I'm just trying to find out what our number of our house is, so I can invite everyone round that's watching." And it was like, whoa. So you know, so I think there's like fun stuff. And now kids don't want to be footballers or whatever. It's Insta fame. You know, it's just, they want to be on YouTube, they want to be on X Factor, they want, you know, they just want instant fame. It's amazing.
There's two sides to that. One worries me a bit, and the other I think is great. There's a startup I heard about the other day that I signed up for their emails that's training for people to become YouTubers, YouTube influencers.
Oh, they're going to make a packet.
They already are. And I think YouTube's great as if you have a passion for something, like, I think that's the important thing. It's the same as celebrity, you know, all the celebrities that aren't that interesting from when I grew up. If all they cared about was celebrity, then that's just vacuous. But if you've got a passion or something you love doing and you've got this avenue to get that message out there, and if you do it with passion and sincerity and an audience engage with it, then win-win-win.
Yeah.
The other thing I just thought about when you were saying that is, if the audience haven't read this book, they should. Paul Arden's book, If It's Not How Good You Are, It's How Good You Want to Be. Is that what it is?
Yes.
There's a page in there.
Are you going to say Victoria Beckham?
No.
Oh, go on.
That's a good quote. But you mentioned about just getting something up there, but I think there's also a point about you just getting out there. So not everyone is an extrovert who wants to get on a stage, but it has a story in there where it sets up a scenario. There are two architects, and one of them's been working for an architectural practice for 20 years, sitting in a back room, not talking to anyone, doggedly getting on with his job. And one of them is a student. He's just graduated. He gets some business cards printed. Ashley Pollak, architect, or even better, architects. And he goes into a bar, gets talking to a guy. That guy is going to view him in exactly the same way as the guy who's been working for 20 years. Yeah. If he's passionate and he talks about what he cares about, he's an architect.
Yeah.
And so just getting out there, it might be networking that you want to do. You might not be setting your own podcast up or doing your own films, but just being confident in your story and knowing that you don't have to, jump up on a stage and juggle and dance, and you can do that quite calmly. Yeah. I learned that from my my father-in-law, who sadly passed away. He a few years ago, but he was quite a well-known chap in football, without going into his name. But he didn't say an awful lot. He was very calm in his skin, and he actually had quite a reputation for deal making. And he was just who he was. He didn't put on the game. He just calmly didn't say a lot. It was what he didn't say rather than what he did say. I learned that from him.
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely people like that. But I think, fortunately, unfortunately, the way everything's going, you're gonna have to have a bit of gift of the gab or self-confidence or something, and everyone's going to be, fast forward 20 years or whatever. It's going to be personal branding. It's going to be everything. I mean, it's happening already, but I think on a mass scale that you'll consciously be thinking about it.
Yeah, but actually coming back to food, just off on a tangent, because we've gone into personality here a lot. The joy of food is you can have, I think it's become a little bit overdone, but, a straight over the top shot of food being prepared.
I'm fed up of those.
There are different spins on them, but like if what you're making... You can focus on the creation rather than the person. Yeah. And, this restaurant I went to last night, the guy who ran the restaurant was actually quite, I don't mean this rudely because I thought he was lovely, but a little bit awkward actually. But that was sort of part of his thing. So I wouldn't expect him to get up and go, welcome to, because it would come across in the wrong way. So you can use animation. I mean... Yeah. There are different ways of doing things, so it's not just about personality.
No, and I think it's that authenticity, isn't it? Yeah. But then from authenticity, there does need to be a story. And but there's quite a few brands we've worked with over the years, and you say, so what's the story? And they're like, we just started a business, and it's like, oh, right, okay. So we're going to have to, and you don't want to lie to people, but you're trying to, as you were saying earlier, alluding to earlier, you kind of. You're searching for the good bits to try and make something of it. Yep. But there are a lot of brands out there that, are, they haven't been built on anything, So I think Ted Baker, right? I think it's just a made up thing and, all these sorts of things. So, it can be tough. So just going back to me back at Yo Sushi, sitting at my desk talking to you on the phone and saying, right, we're going to do this. I've got, a few £1,000, whatever. So, you've got the brief right. You've researched a bit, planning all this kind of stuff. Where do you sort of take it from there? Would you recommend taking a budget and doing something kind of iconic or epic with it? Or is it about little and often these days?
Is it about little? I mean, it depends. That's the question about where the content is going to go and how it's going to be used, as well as what the idea is, how that cycle comes together. So we did a cinema ad for the British Museum for an exhibition last year, and it was running in cinemas for a week. You're not going to do a conversion practical, here's the British Museum, here's the entrance. You've got to hit it with a bang. There's some content on Wyevale we produced 2 years ago that's still sitting on their site. So I think that depends. What I've found is the most successful is when you try and tally up everything with a single-minded campaign. Yeah. So for lastminute.com, we did a campaign called was Searching for a Spontaneity Champion. And originally working with their PR team because they came up with the spontaneity champion, but the idea was to do a Facebook competition. And we thought, no, there's something more in this. And that campaign was very linked up between what we produced as content, which was an initial video, which was, hey, it's great to live spontaneously. Then a website which had a voting mechanism so you could interact and you could follow people. It had a user-generated content side to it. It had, when people entered the competition, we gave them the music and the sting to go on the beginning. So then all of those were branded within the campaign. Then it went out in press. Then there were ads. Then there were... That's the most effective use of spend, actually, is where you go, right, we're going to do this campaign. And then... I mean, this is what I would love with clients, and I've got a lovely client at the moment who is in this position where they've told me what the year's budget is, and I can turn around and say, well, don't spend that money on that. Let's do that cost effectively. In fact, why don't you do that on a phone, or why don't we do that as a podcast, or why don't we... It's the Design Council. I think they should link up with 99% Invisible, which is a fantastic podcast. I don't think they should do it themselves. Let's spend money in this way.
Yep.
Another thing we're doing for them is... recutting and repurposing their top 30 videos on Vimeo. So they've got 500 videos, and I highlighted to them, your number one video is 7 years old and looks 7 years. It's got some great content in it, but let's take that, let's refresh it. So if you're at Yo Sushi, I'd want to know, are you repositioning something? Is it some new products or food that's coming out? Is it to your existing customers? Is it to get new customers? And then try and find the most sort of cost-effective way of creating something that is going to hook in people's minds, I guess.
Because I think what's interesting, again, it's just to hammer home the point, because we come across it quite often. People will say, I've got X amount for a video, $3,000, $12,000, whatever it is. And you go, right, that's great. But then, like building a website with no SEO or PPC or whatever, same thing. And they go, oh, we need to have more money to then put it on media channels. And you're like, yeah. And I think, predominantly the organic game isn't dead, but it's tough. So, I think it's about spending as much as you can, but being sensible on the content, but actually having a bigger, almost tenfold budget for people to see it, because it's heartbreaking when you see, and the reason why we're not talking about so many food and drink brands is not enough food and drink brands are investing in video, right? It just isn't happening. And I'm so keen for people to get on the train and do this. And I think, they then spend all the money in the video and it's got 200 views and you just think, come on, it's so frustrating from a marketing point of view. So I think also there's just this great evergreen stuff that people could do. So if you're a food and drink brand, it's no surprise what's going to happen in summer for the next 5 years, next 50 years. People are going to have a barbecue. So guess what? If you do grilled products or you sell steak, or why you not got that evergreen video that will last for a while, that you can actually put up and, or talk about your rosé collection, or, and I think, I don't know what's stopping people in the food and drink industry. I don't know why they're not diving in. And I know, they're really busy and all the rest of it. But I just think I'm just really imploring someone listening to just go big on it, go really big on video, because no one else really is.
Well, we've sort of ended up talking a lot about YouTube and characters and personality and all of that. I'd flip that round slightly. One of my big recommendations is a video platform called Wistia.
Okay.
Wistia. I don't make any money from promoting it on this podcast. YouTube, in the end, is interested in promoting YouTube. If you're sending people somewhere else, and as a brand, if we can keep them within our environment, much better. Vimeo has a pro service, slightly better. Wistia is built for business. They give you 3 free videos, and then they charge whatever the fee is they charge. But the data you get from that, you can see what every single individual viewer has done, what they've watched. You can then, if you link that into your email list, which costs a bit more money, you can see by individual person who they are.
Yeah. GDPR wise?
Yeah.
Check it out.
Check it out. But the point I was going to make was I'd much rather have 200 views on my website and know that 10 people had walked in the door than 200 views on YouTube, or actually 100 of them are in Kansas and my restaurant's in Paris.
Yeah.
So having a platform where you can actually learn something, even if it's just learning engagement, which is much better on Wistia than it is on Vimeo, I would focus first on the places you own, the real estate you own. Email is hugely powerful. Wyevale, we mostly built off that. They had a very good email list, and people on emails like stories, not just here's an offer and here's an offer, here's an offer. If you have a story, it stands out. So I would, I'd be cautious of the social game. If you're going to do something, start with the obvious easy stuff. If you're a restaurant, if you're a hairdresser, you want to give a sense of the experience, give a sense of the people. That's a great place to start. Don't try and change the world first of all.
Yeah.
Then you might get on to, if you've got an email list, that you could start doing stuff that's more tailored. Then when you've got a bit of an audience or people are following you on Facebook, you could, as you say, start doing something on a phone. Great other tip. Spend a day filming 30 pieces of content and then feed those out every day. Don't try and do one thing, then another and another. There's, if you watch TV and you watch a quiz show, they film 10 of those in a row. I mean, that's how it works in TV.
Pointless.
Yeah.
The poor guys Absolutely. Are like, good morning, I think, good afternoon.
So sort of group stuff together. Don't make it overwhelming for yourself. Say, right, we're going to do a one-day shoot where we're going to produce 10 films for social media. We're going to do a one-day shoot where we're going to link up with, I'm going to contact a local college and offer them the type of money you offer me, and I'd say go to the local film college. But there are a lot of up-and-coming people who want to break and can film stuff that, I'd say the difference between someone like that and me is that my focus is getting the messaging right and really digging in and getting the right thing, getting the right response from people. It's a bit like the difference between watching Michael Parkinson interview someone and watching...
Me?
No. What was that programme on Channel 5 with, Ian Wright? And anyway, you get the idea. Like, that's what experience buys you. Jon Snow, there are reasons these people get paid a lot of money. But if you want something that looks good, the fact remains a student with a laptop and a DSLR camera that costs 500 quid can film something that looks nice, and you as the business owner, you know your story and can interrogate it. And if you look up the job spec of a video producer and then try and think how you can be that, you could produce something that was really good.
Well, I think just thinking about the student thing and leveraging that, definitely. I mean, there might also be someone in your staff, or there might be, you're going to find stars all over it, or someone's mate, or someone's son's looking, or their daughter's looking for an internship, or, So I think there's lots of opportunity, and, I really buy into that whole Gary Vaynerchuk stuff of document, don't create, from the point of view that, of course, to create something beautiful is good and all that, but just keep filming, because you never know what good's going to come out of it, So, a day in the life of an employee, or, something about the customers, or maybe it is tracking your board around the place. And, maybe with some of the restaurants that are having harder times right now, if they documented some of it, they would maybe be getting a bit of sympathy of saying, look, if these customers don't come back to us, and then this is what we're doing about it, because they'll have known it was going downhill a few months before, I'm sure, and they could have had the chance to be open and tell their story rather than it just hitting the news.
Then look at TV.
Yeah,
I mean, TV companies pay to go into Sainsbury's or Selfridges or the Tube. The series The Tube.
Yeah,
we. I wish I knew all of the breakdown of it. It's another thing on our wall. People love stories about people like that. Like, if they can identify personally with you, people love stories about people like them.
Yeah.
So if they're like, right, actually that's a real person and I'm with their journey, and that's the power of documentary. I mean, that's
Yeah.
That's my real passion. So absolutely.
Slightly more expensive than $3,500, I would assume.
Well, if you're working in the restaurant, as you say, I mean, gosh, in fact, I think one member of my staff I nabbed from a local cafe.
All right.
So, talk to people, find out what they. I mean, that happened to me in advertising. That's kind of the first video thing I did when I worked in direct marketing. Someone held their hand up and said, "Does anyone know a video guy?" And I said, "I went to film school." And then I found myself in an edit suite editing a thing for Microsoft. I mean, scaring myself because I didn't quite get the kit. It was slightly different from what I'd used, but ask around, but pay them. I mean, that's one of the things within video is to put a value on something. Obviously, if doesn't have to be a lot of money, but freebies. I'm not big into freebies. Even with people who are up and coming, there should be a value placed on what they do.
Well, it's something I was going to say earlier when I was back at Yo Sushi. We've talked about Yo Sushi a lot, but when I was there, we hooked up with an amazing photographer called Louis Banks, and Louis Banks now is a celeb in his own right, and he's taking photos of everyone from, who's he got? I think it's even things like Rihanna and Ellie Goulding, and I mean, my God, it's just unbelievable. So yeah, he's just a little student in Brighton, so I went down to visit him, and I'd found this photo. Oh, I know what it was. He got in touch with us, and he said, "Can I use your Brighton Yo Sushi for a photo shoot?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure, you crack on." And it was the morning anyway, it didn't really matter. And he was photographing a young girl called Georgina. I think she's now a big model. I think it's Georgina Hobday, I think her name is. And years ago, there was a thing that was a Facebook party happen. So this young girl, her parents were aware, whatever, put up on Facebook, I'm having a party, and everyone turned up, whatever it was, I can't remember. And anyway, it was her, that was getting, and she was 16, 18, whatever. And the photos were just unbelievable. I mean, just sort of hyper real, crazy Tokyo, just nuts. There was I mean, they're all great, but there was a couple of real iconic ones in there, and it was her really sort of Tokyo'd up, nude or topless anyway, but cut off respectfully, and just kind of launching into this sushi roll sort of thing, and that became the image of Yo Sushi for, I think they might even still have used it of late. I mean, maybe not right now, but yeah, we kept paying him. He asked for a license. We just said, "Is there anything we can do for you?" And still say hi now and again on Instagram and stuff. But he's so Louis Banks Shoots, I think it's called, his Instagram feed, and it's just mega fun. Louis looks like he has a party every day. So, but I think that's a real lesson, which is just go out and take the opportunity to speak to a student and just say yes and give it a go. But I mean, man, we did way better out of it than he did, but we gave him something. But
that's one of the
iconic,
one of the key things for me with my business is constantly keeping an eye out. I get a lot. I wish I got as many calls from people on my website, from people offering me work as asking for work. But I meet people constantly. I mean, I've got amazing people I've worked with for years, have very loyal relationships with, but I'm always keen to know what new people are doing and people who've graduated. And also there's a lot of someone I've just employed who just hadn't really got his break, should have done.
Yeah.
And you need to kind of be open to that as a business owner as well, because those people who have got the drive are fabulous to mentor. Because they've got something to learn and you can develop them. And that's the same if you're hiring someone as a brand, as you just highlighted.
Oh, we were amazed with him. And then thinking about the inside piece then, so employee engagement and all these things, I think that's important. And I think people undervalue telling the stories of the brand and other people around, the colleagues, to staff. That doesn't seem to happen enough. So, a lot of people are always looking for an internal comms video or a this or that. But yeah, I mean, what's your experience on that? What are you finding out there?
I mean, I was saying before about listening to your podcast with Robert Bean, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, he's great.
And he made the point about BT that the campaign, was it BT, that the campaign they did had as much value internally as it did externally, and obviously a company of the size of BT, they're going to be noticing those billboards. We had a situation with a client where we did a brand repositioning film internally, which then ended up being recut into an ad that went up on social, and it was going to be on VOD. It wasn't on VOD, it was on social. So I think in terms of values and brand, they should be one and the same thing. But if you're, let's say, a brand that has a chain, there's another thing with Millies, we put staff in the films.
Great.
And so I think a lot of what drove the success of that was people sharing content within staff networks and friends. Millies is great as a business for staff because if you're creative, it's got a creative output to it. So they loved it. So have I learnt something? I wouldn't view those two things completely in isolation because you should be able to link them up more. Robert said about that again on the podcast about which, if you haven't listened to that episode, you have to.
Yeah, he's good value. Right?
He was saying about a restaurant he went to that was expensive, but he was quite happy paying more money for it because of the experience, particularly around the staff, and that it was as if they had been employed to be a certain type of person. Well, if you've got staff that are the brand, for goodness sake, use them.
yeah. And I think it's getting tougher out there, and the restaurant people, owners and CEOs and whatever, they're really just trying to hang on to the good people. And I think our phone's getting busier on that employee engagement side, and I think it would be a good use of spend, rather than a new website or advertising or whatever it is. I think really for the next couple of years, probably just continuing to live your brand values through your staff, who no matter what you think, your title might be head of brand, but you're nothing to do with it really. It's the people that we meet when we go and have our dinner at name your brand.
Yeah, we tried to do that with Wyevale, that there are people within the brand there that they're passionate about. They've got their stories. The challenge with a video is you're trying to tally up people who have a great story but are also good on film. But maybe there's someone there that would be great at writing blogs or tweets or whatever.
And have you got any advice on sort of lengths of video? This comes up all the time. People always ask, and is there a right answer?
There's no.
Right.
Well, I've used the example that if something's good, you'll watch it, right? Like Netflix is online video, and we'll watch the series on, you sit in bed for a Saturday watching 7 hours of that. So if something's great, going back to M&S when we worked there, if feature documentaries, like if it's a good feature documentary, it happens to be made by who cares? It can be as long as you want it to be. However, there are certain places within video where some rules apply. So, for example, on Facebook, we've got into a bit of a knack of 12 to 15 second videos. Like, how can we come up with this? It's basically an ad, a single-minded idea that someone will take away that captures your eye. It's quite pacey, it's quite visual. Instagram, little animated GIF, almost things that are 3 seconds long, that can affect, as I understand, the algorithm, because if you get lots of completed views, that can push your posts out to other. I heard. Don't know the data of that. But when it comes to YouTube, I noticed the other day that, and I hadn't actually. Sometimes I miss out on things which have gone viral and I haven't heard about. But they were talking about Poo-Pourri, and have you seen that?
No.
Poo-Pourri and the other brand, I've forgotten their name. It's a potty. It's basically a thing that you. It's a video. It's a thing you put under your toilet to put your feet on, because apparently that opens up your sphincter. Nice. And this video, I'm going to remember the name of it. It's 4 minutes long, and it is a guy dressed in sort of Tudor clothing, English guy, talking to camera with a unicorn basically crapping out multicoloured poo into ice cream cones.
Nice.
Right? So, and that went completely viral.
Worth 4 minutes of watching.
But what I found most interesting about it is it's fun. You watch it and go, this is a bit ridiculous. It's quite funny. But then it actually is quite specific about how this thing actually works. So they play this balance between doing something that as a TV ad, you go, that's quite funny, I'll share it with a friend. But actually, I'd have to look at the engagement graph of how many people watch it. But I reckon a lot of people watch that. And I now understand, I've forgotten the name of it, but I now understand exactly what that thing does. It was almost like a how-to film, but framed in a really bizarre way. Ludicrous, so I was like, whoa. Anyway, and then there's another competitor of theirs called Poo-Pourri, and that's basically a thing you spritz on the surface of the water before you go for and apparently it makes it smell. And again, another video that's 3 minutes long that had, and there's a series of them, it had a scenario, you're on a date with a girl, and what happens if, ABCD, and longer video. So I think it's whatever length the story warrants. And also who the audience is, because one thing we worked on this training content for chefs, and I sort of will think that I know things and then suddenly realise I don't. If you have an audience that is quite a tight community, like the bar industry, we did some stuff for the bar industry, I was amazed how much that content got shared and talked about, because people like. So I think you got to think about your audience as well. There are certain brands that people really don't care about, so how are you going to get them to care? But there are other ones where people, nanotechnologists, they will watch an hour of content, and if that's who you're talking to, then crack on, they might watch a talking head. So
whoa, I didn't think we'd be talking about that. However, there might be some restaurants and pubs listening that might want to invest. So that could be quite fun. But I was just thinking, have you got any sort of final tips or final thoughts that you want to share your wisdom? Not final tips, but just something I'd push people towards. Well, two things I noticed recently. I was kind of thinking, what have I been inspired by recently? Or something I was inspired by that's really led how I do what I do. And then a campaign I saw very recently, separate from the poo one. And I would highly recommend a guy that I got somewhat obsessed with many years ago when I worked in advertising. I read a book and it really changed my life, actually. It's why I got fired from an agency, because I read this book and I thought, this is untenable. Anyway, the guy's name is Howard Luck Gossage. And if you go to howardluckgossage.com, I tried to make a documentary about this guy and somewhat gave up. So I put all the content, interviews and photographs and on here. Anyway, Howard was this ad man in 60s San Francisco, and he built an agency in a little firehouse in North Beach. And this firehouse became this amazing sort of forgotten salon, really. Okay. He became friends with Buckminster Fuller and Tom Wolfe and Marcia McLuhan, and artists would come and writers would come, and they had a jolly old time. But anyway, Howard was an ad man, and his form of advertising was very much about storytelling, about brand conversations, about being respectful. He would say things like, to explain morality to an ad man is like trying to explain to a 5-year-old that sex is more interesting than ice cream. And he said, I quite like billboard advertising. I just see no right for it to exist. So he was quite sort of controversial, but he got offered the Volkswagen account and turned it down. Anyway, he did a campaign called Pink Air, and there's an ad which hopefully you'll link to. And this ad is so relevant to what we're doing now, and it's from 1962. And I don't have it in front of me now. It says something along the lines of, it's for a petrol company. If you're driving down the road, basically if we happen to be on your side of the road and there aren't 4 cars in front of you and you're not in a rush, why not stop in? And then it had a coupon on the bottom. So it has a form of direct response. But I loved the tone of that the honesty of, like, if your tank's not
running out, you're not going to stop at us.
Yeah.
If you're in a hurry, you're not going to stop at us. But we stand for something that's different from these people, and if that's of interest to you, then great.
Yeah.
It's kind of got this laid back, but so clever. You have to look at this ad. And so I think there's something in there about you don't have to shout, like just be honest and who you are and stand out differently and put a coupon in, get some response, try and learn something.
Yeah.
I also did another campaign called Is This Your Shirt? I'll link to that as well. And then the other thing I saw just literally the other day, it was in an Adobe article. It was a campaign that Vodafone did called, it has a pig in it. I'm trying to remember the name of it. And I've said this point at the beginning of this podcast, but I'll say it again. Piggy Sue, that's it.
Yeah.
And watch that video, because apparently that was one of the most successful recent pieces of content. And it's this point I said at the beginning, really, that if your brand can be an enabler of a story, then you're like home free. Yeah. And this ad, it's just a lovely little narrative, and it's about communication. It doesn't show you a phone. It doesn't have any kind of practical how our product works shots. It's a story, and it reminded me of BT. It's good to talk.
Yeah.
And so if you can nail that, if you can own communication, then you're home free.
Nice. Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank
to meet
you.
you.
Pleasure too.
Actually, for the first time, probably. So, just lots of great stuff. And I think, I really hope that your information you've shared and your examples and also that it doesn't need to cost the earth. We'll just implore people to make the first step to jumping off the cliff and
good luck
getting on with it. So, all right. Thanks so much, Ashley.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Ashley Pollak of Etio for coming in to talk to us about content and, of course, about unicorn poo. Lots and lots of extras from Ash, which we'll put up on the podcast notes, so please look out for that. Please do rate, review, subscribe and share the Spectacular Marketing Podcast. It would be a huge help to us and we'd be very grateful. Also, a massive thank you to the exec production team, Gabby, Gaz and Mihal, for helping us put this wonderful podcast together. I'm Mark McCulloch, and this was Spectacular.